All right, so we're diving deep into Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy today. We're going to unpack this whole idea that ego can actually hold us back from reaching our full potential.
It's almost like ego is this sneaky force that makes us think we're further along than we actually are.
Yeah, it's that voice in our head that wants all the praise and avoids anything that might make us look bad. But Holiday really breaks down how ego can be a major roadblock in those early stages when we're just starting to, aspire to something big.
Right, right. He divides the book into three parts: aspire, success, and failure. And we'll go through each of them, but let's start with aspire.
So wouldn't you think ego would be like a good thing when you're ambitious? I mean, isn't it all about believing in yourself?
You would think so, but Holiday throws a curveball and says it's actually when we're first starting out that ego can be the most deceptive.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, he starts by talking about how ego makes us talk about our goals instead of actually pursuing them.
Oh, I see. Like it's more about looking good than actually doing the work.
Exactly, and he uses the example of boxer Joe Louis, a world heavyweight champion.
Hmm.
Louis let his victories in the ring speak for themselves. No bragging, no self-promotion, just pure action.
Right. It's like less time crafting the perfect social media post about your hustle and more time, actually hustling.
Exactly. So less talk, more action. That's one way to keep ego in check.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we know if we're chasing true purpose or if it's just ego driving us toward prestige and recognition?
Holiday brings in a fascinating figure, military strategist John Boyd. Now, Boyd was brilliant. He developed groundbreaking ideas like the OD loop, a decision-making framework used by, well, everybody from the military to business. But he actively avoided the spotlight.
Really? That's
Oh,
interesting.
yeah, he even turned down promotions so he could stay in positions where he felt he could make a real impact. He wasn't interested in titles or accolades.
Wow. So his focus was really on the work itself, on contributing something meaningful.
Exactly. And that's a clear sign that he was driven by purpose, not by ego.
Okay, that's a great example. Now, this next idea is kind of surprising. I mean, we always hear about the importance of following your passion, but Holiday suggests that passion isn't always a good thing.
It's not that simple. He argues that unchecked passion without any sort of, guidance or strategy can be reckless.
Yeah.
He uses the myth of Icarus as an example. Remember, Icarus flew too close to the sun because he was so captivated by flight. Passion, in that case, led to his downfall.
Right, got it.
Holiday then contrasts Icarus with Howard Hughes, whose early success came from a combination of passion and calculated risk-taking.
Right.
So it's not about ditching passion altogether, but about tempering it with reason and making sure it's aligned with a clear purpose.
So it's like passion needs a roadmap, a strategy to guide it?
Exactly. Passion without direction can be like a car with a powerful engine but no steering wheel.
You're going to end up somewhere, but it might not be where you want to go. Okay,
Go.
so passion needs to be focused. What else should we be aware of in this aspire phase?
Well, Holiday says that helping others succeed can actually open doors for us.
Wait, really? How does that work?
He calls it the canvas strategy and uses his own experience as an example. You see, he worked for author Robert Greene behind the scenes on a book called The 48 Laws of Power.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that book. It was huge, right?
Exactly. But instead of demanding credit or trying to steal the spotlight, Holiday focused on making the book the best it could be. And that experience, working on a project bigger than himself, helped him launch his own writing career.
Interesting. So it's like putting your ego aside and focusing on contributing to something bigger than yourself can actually lead to greater personal success down the road.
Right. When you help others shine, everyone benefits in the long run. It's a win-win.
So it's not always about being in the spotlight.
Mm.
Sometimes the most impactful work happens behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about channeling our passion, helping others, and focusing on action over talk. But what about when things get tough? How do we keep ego from, hijacking our reactions when we face obstacles or criticism?
Well, Holiday emphasizes the importance of self-control. He points to Jackie Robinson, the first African-American player in Major League Baseball. Think about the incredible amount of racism and hostility he faced.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine.
But Robinson chose to respond with restraint. He let his performance on the field speak louder than any outburst.
So he was playing the long game. He knew that reacting impulsively would only hurt his cause.
Exactly. And that's a crucial lesson in keeping ego in check. Choosing long-term goals over giving in to immediate gratification or reacting emotionally.
Okay, self-control, it's easy to say. Much harder to do in the heat of the moment, but definitely something to strive for.
Absolutely. And one last thing about this aspire phase, Holiday reminds us that we need to get out of our own heads.
Out of our heads, what does that mean?
He uses Shakespeare as an example. Shakespeare didn't become one of the greatest writers by, sitting alone in a room and navel gazing. He observed the world around him. He studied people. He drew inspiration from his experiences.
So it's about engaging with the world rather than getting lost in a loop of our own thoughts and anxieties.
Exactly.
This is giving me a lot to think about. I'm really curious to see how this all plays out in the next stage. Success.
Okay, so we've talked about how sneaky ego can be when we're striving for something. But what happens when we actually get there? When we achieve success? How does ego show up then?
You'd think success would be the time to, celebrate and enjoy the fruits of your labor. But Holiday warns us that success can actually be a breeding ground for ego.
It's almost like ego thrives on success. It can make us complacent, arrogant, even entitled.
Right, and that can obviously lead to problems down the road.
Exactly. Holiday emphasizes that even when we achieve success, we should never stop learning. He uses Bill Walsh as an example, the legendary coach who led the San Francisco 49ers to multiple Super Bowl wins. Even at the peak of his career, Walsh never stopped studying, never stopped refining his strategies.
So it's like, even when you're at the top of your game, there's always room for improvement. You can't just rest on your laurels.
Right. True mastery is an ongoing journey, not a destination. Ego wants us to believe we've arrived, that we have it all figured out. But that's a dangerous mindset because it closes us off to new ideas and prevents us from growing.
It's like you're standing still while everyone else is moving forward.
Exactly. Holiday highlights another danger, the tendency to craft a flattering narrative about ourselves. We start to believe our own hype.
Oh yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that, especially when you're surrounded by people who are always telling you how great you are. Didn't he use General George McClellan as an example of this?
Yeah, McClellan was a Union general during the Civil War. He was brilliant on paper, but he was also deeply insecure and convinced of his own genius.
And that led to problems, right?
Big problems. McClellan hesitated. He overestimated the enemy. He missed opportunities. He was so focused on the story he was telling himself, the story of being this brilliant strategist, that he lost sight of reality.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? How do we stay grounded and see things clearly even when we're experiencing success?
Holiday says it's crucial to stick to the facts, to be brutally honest with ourselves about our strengths and weaknesses, and seek out objective feedback, not just from yes men.
So surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth even if it's not what you want to hear.
Exactly. It's about being willing to confront uncomfortable truths, even if it bruises our ego.
That's tough, but important. And this leads us to another key point, defining success on our own terms. It's so easy to get caught up in external validation, chasing money, fame, recognition. But those things don't always equal true fulfillment.
Right. Holiday argues that real success comes from aligning our actions with our values, regardless of what the outside world thinks. He talks about Steve Jobs' return to Apple. Jobs' first stint at Apple was driven by ego, ambition, this desire to be seen as a visionary.
But when he came back, it was different. He was more focused on creating products that he truly believed in, products that would make a real difference in the world.
Exactly. That shift from ego-driven to purpose-driven led to Apple's resurgence. It's an incredible example of how letting go of ego's demands can actually lead to more meaningful success.
It's a reminder that we get to decide what success looks like for us. We don't have to buy into someone else's definition. But even when we define success on our own terms, there are still potential pitfalls, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Holiday talks about the dangers of entitlement, control, and paranoia. Basically, how success, if we're not careful, can turn into a kind of poison.
A poison, that's a strong word.
But it's true. He uses Howard Hughes as an example. Hughes was a brilliant innovator early in his career, but as his wealth and fame grew, he became increasingly isolated and suspicious.
Right, he became obsessed with control, with micromanaging every aspect of his life.
Exactly. He was so afraid of losing what he had built that he ended up a prisoner of his own fears and insecurities. It's a cautionary tale of how success, filtered through the lens of ego, can lead to a very dark place.
It's a good reminder that success doesn't make us immune to the dangers of ego. In fact, it can actually amplify them. So what are the antidotes to this success poison? How do we enjoy success without letting it destroy us?
So we've talked about how ego can trip us up when we're reaching for success and even when we achieve it, but what about when things don't go our way? What about when we experience failure?
Yeah, because failure is a part of life, right? It happens to all of us, no matter how talented or successful we are.
Exactly. And it's often in those moments of failure, when our ego is bruised and vulnerable, that we have the biggest opportunity for growth.
The question is, how do we respond? Because, when failure hits, our ego wants to protect itself. It makes us want to blame others, make excuses, or just kind of wallow in self-pity.
It's a natural reaction, but it's not a helpful one. Holiday argues that in those moments when ego is wounded, we have a choice. Do we let failure define us, or do we use it as fuel to grow?
He talks about the difference between alive time and dead time. When we're consumed by ego, failure becomes dead time, a period of stagnation and self-doubt.
Right, we get stuck in a rut, but when we approach failure with a growth mindset, it becomes a lifetime. It's a chance to reflect, learn from our mistakes, and ultimately come back stronger.
I like that. Alive time versus dead time. It's a good way to think about it.
And he uses Malcolm X as an example. Malcolm X turned what most people would consider a devastating setback imprisonment into a period of intense learning and self-development.
He used that time to really educate himself, didn't he?
He did. He read voraciously, studied history and philosophy, and emerged from prison a much more powerful and articulate leader. It's an incredible example of how we can choose to respond to even the most difficult circumstances.
It's a good reminder that even when things are really tough, we still have agency. We can choose how we react and how we use that experience.
Exactly. And Holiday also talks about the importance of focusing on effort over outcome. Now, this can be a tough one because we live in a society that's obsessed with results. But tying our self-worth to outcomes can be a recipe for disaster because, well, so much is outside of our control.
Right, you can work really hard and still not achieve the desired result. Sometimes it's just bad luck or circumstances beyond our control.
Exactly. And if our sense of self is solely based on those outcomes, we're going to be on a constant roller coaster of emotions. But our effort, our dedication to the process, that's something we can control.
It's about focusing on what we can't control, not what we can't.
Exactly. And that can actually bring a lot of peace and a sense of steady progress, even when we don't achieve the outcome we hoped for. Holiday uses the example of Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius to illustrate this point.
Marcus Aurelius, wasn't he kind of a stoic philosopher as well?
He was, and he ruled during a really turbulent time. But he didn't get caught up in all the anxieties about potential outcomes. He focused on fulfilling his duties to the best of his ability day after day.
It's like he found a sense of purpose in the effort itself, not in some external validation or the pursuit of glory.
Exactly. And it's a great reminder that sometimes the journey is more important than the destination. Finding meaning in the process, in the daily grind, can be a source of real strength, especially when we're facing setbacks.
This is making me think about all the times I've gotten discouraged when things didn't go according to plan. But maybe it's not about avoiding failure, but about shifting how we view it.
Absolutely. Holiday actually calls these moments of failure Fight Club moments, referencing that scene in the movie where Brad Pitt's character punches Edward Norton's character, forcing him to confront the reality of his situation.
It's about waking up to the truth, even when it's painful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shattering those comfortable narratives we tell ourselves and embracing the raw, sometimes uncomfortable truth. And in those moments of honesty, we can often find hidden strengths we didn't even know we had.
That's a good point. Sometimes we need that jolt, that Fight Club moment to really see things clearly.
He uses the example of Muhammad Ali's loss to Joe Frazier.
Oh, yeah. Ali, wasn't he known for his, confidence and swagger?
He was. So that defeat was devastating for him, but instead of letting it break him, he used it to train harder, adapt his strategy, and ultimately he reclaimed his title in a rematch.
It's a great example of how failure can sometimes be the catalyst for our greatest triumphs. It forces us to look at our weaknesses, learn from our mistakes, and come back even stronger. So, failure is inevitable, but it doesn't have to define us. It's all about how we choose to respond to it.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most crucial piece of advice Holiday offers for dealing with failure. Take responsibility.
Oh, yeah. That's huge. Because our natural instinct is to deflect blame, make excuses, get defensive, anything but own up to our mistakes.
Right. But Holiday argues that taking ownership, even when it's painful, is the only way to truly move forward. He points to Abraham Lincoln, who, during the Civil War, openly took responsibility for military setbacks, even when a lot of those setbacks weren't directly his fault.
That's true. Leadership, taking responsibility even when it's tough.
And that willingness to be accountable, to shoulder the blame, actually fostered a sense of trust and loyalty. People respected him for it.
It's a good reminder that real leadership involves taking ownership. And that act of taking responsibility rather than shirking it is what allows us to learn from our mistakes and become better leaders.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into ego is the enemy, remember this. Ego is the enemy in every stage of our lives, but it's especially dangerous when we're dealing with failure. It keeps us trapped in that cycle of blame and self-pity and robs us of the opportunity to grow and learn from those setbacks.
But if we can manage that ego, if we can approach failure with honesty, humility, and a willingness to learn, we can transform those experiences into fuel for future success. As you go through your own journey, remember setbacks are going to happen. They're unavoidable. But it's really up to you how you respond. And in those choices, you'll discover just how strong you really are.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.